Welcome to this introduction workshop for basics of UI and UX design. This workshop is conducted for Cisco thingQbator in collaboration with the Li2 Technologies. To begin with, I'm going to just start with what is going to be the content for this workshop. We're going to have a basic introduction to what is design, and we'll also understand what is UI and UX design. We'll try and understand the differences between UI, UX, and product design. Later, we'll also progress to understanding what are the different UI design elements and principles of UI design. And we will have a small guided experiment or a guided exercise to actually spot and understand these UI patterns and elements used in the existing products in industry. Later, we'll slowly progress to understanding what are the tools used for designing. And here we'll be looking at Adobe and Zeppelin. And we can also look at some design rules for each platform. And then we will try and apply this and develop a defined set of screens and interactions. Before we begin with the session, I would like to introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. I am Tejasvi and I'm a UX designer and researcher. I'm currently working for Pictor Labs, which is a future-focused product design innovation company. And we work in solving and creating new solutions which are faced in the digital world. Before this, I also worked at Aether Energy Private Limited as a UI, as a design researcher, and here I was involved in researching about and researching and gathering insights for developing the smart electric ecosystem. I also hold a master's in human-centered design, and I pursued my master's at Shrishti School of Art and Design. Other than this, I play ultimate frisbee for a Bangalore team, and I am a free-time illustrator and an artist. So let's proceed and begin with our session. So we're going to start with understanding what is a design. Actually, design does not really have any specific definition. Design is understood and practiced in different ways by different practitioners and designers of in different types of design field. So I have something which thoroughly resonates with me the most, and this is what I perceive design to be. And this is actually quoted by a Berlin-based UI designer called as Koos Lugestein. Just one second. Yeah, so Koos Lugestein. What he defines is that design is a plan to make something new for people. And this new solution should be beneficial and it should serve the purpose and the need of the people. So basically, design is somewhere where business, engineering, art, all of these come together and play their unique roles to develop a solution. Um, a solution or it can also be something new that can solve a problem that hasn't been solved before or solve a problem in a different way. So this is what design is, or design is what I see to be. This is something what design is perceived to be in many ways. We think is design as something physical, like a product design uh, or an automobile design. But design can be in so many different ways. What you see here is also design put together. I'll just explain each one of these examples a little bit more. The first one, which you see here, is actually a post-COVID design for people to use the public facilities. This is this is for designing for behavior, and this example is the Domino's Park in Brooklyn, where they've actually divided the space into circles and they're trying to dictate the behavior of the users to make sure they maintain some social distance. So the thought and the process of designing this and executing this is also design. And what you see here is a poster for conveying some information, and specifically aims at conveying some information to the kids, where they're teaching about protecting themselves and their loved ones about coronavirus. So this is designing for communication. What we see here is a deck of cards for Uno, Uno's deck of cards, but if you carefully actually look at it, you can see how it is designed for accessibility, and it has a braille on the cards, which can also be used by uh, people who are visually impaired. So this and the thought process of this and designing for people who are visually impaired is also a design where we're designing and considering for people who have some what do you say, disabilities. This is another example. This is an architectural project by one of the architects from Denmark or Copenhagen. His name is Briak Ingels, and this is an example of the serpentine, serpentine. I forgot the actual name of it. It's called. I think it's Serpentine Gallery. I'm not too sure. You can just check more details about the projects on their website. What I'm trying to actually convey here is, yeah, it's called as a Serpentine Pavilion. Um, what I'm trying to convey here is it is designed for physical interaction of people and how the movement of people can be dictated through architectural design. This is also designing. And this is the next example you see is a very famous interface, which is the user interface of Instagram. This is also designing, where we're designing for the new generation or the new era of digital products, where there is so much information out there, and we're creating like a social networking where people just meet online and talk to each other online. Now, even that is designing, we're creating a new culture. So this is an example of Instagram and how that has been used in various ways, from connecting people to having businesses and having personal profiles and blogs and etc. So that product is also designing. So let's try and understand what is UI and UX design. UI design is anything a user may interact with to use a digital product or a service. It can be as simple as a switchboard, a keypad, a mouse, even your phone interface. Right now, we've progressed using it in various ways in different digital products, like touch is one on our cell phones or on our mobiles we use for a user interface. And we've also progressed to a voice interaction. What we see here is an example of Amazon's Echo. So Amazon's voice interaction. So we have various products which are interacted, uh, which we interact through voice. And now we also have the technology of AR and VR. And we're slowly progressing, and the technology is moving ahead, and the way we use our products is varying. So the way the user interactions are also developing in the same speed as technology is. To move on, let's UX design. UX was a term which was coined by Don Norman. He's a cognitive scientist, and it was coined early in the 1990s when he was working at Apple. So he defines it in a specific way, which he calls it as that UX encompasses all the aspects of a end-to-end user interaction, whether it is with the company's products, the service of the company. All these come under UX experience in everyday life. He has written a book. You see an image and an example from that book. the design of everyday things. And here he talks about a set of teapots, and I have chosen one particular teapot and explain how the spout, the handle, all of that come in the same. Comes to use. Um, Design also means that there should be some usefulness, some value, some accessibility, and only then the design can be credited and there can be some value of the product. This was further explored and developed by Peter Morville, and he created this UX Honeycomb, uh, which is like a standard or which is like a set of standard elements which define UX experience and user experience, and it is largely understood and used widely to define anything in terms of user experience. So this honeycomb talks about crafting experiences or making products which have certain value, which are credible, which are findable, which can be used in different ways, and the usability aspect of it, and how desirable is it by a user, and how accessible is it. Can different types of users use it, or is it only to cater to certain set of users? So all of these terms can be defined and understood to understand the user experience of any product, and this is called as the honeycomb of UX experience. Let's try and understand a little bit about how user experience has evolved over time. What you see here is an example of a Siri, which is a voice-based interaction on our iPhones. So this is a simple question where the user is talking to Siri. He says, "Remind me tomorrow at 8 a.m. to eat the potatoes for breakfast." But if you carefully look at it, the time is 1:47 a.m. So Siri replies saying, "Did you mean October 7th or October 8th?" So she's reconfirming which tomorrow or what is this tomorrow the user is referring to. So crafting this experience and getting this clarity from a user is also designing for user experience. This is a wonderful example of using all these elements and bringing together a digital product or the experience of using this digital product. So, what is the difference between UI and UX? So UI is made up of elements that will enable a user to interact with the product, whereas UX is like the entire process of it, where the user is interacting with the product, service, and the entire system of it. So UI actually is a part of UX design, and they all work together to bring about the whole experience of the product. Then let's just move on and try and understand what is product designing. Product designing is come into place and understood in different ways since recently in India especially. So if you look at product design, where I'm referring to digital product design, and this is the area I'm talking about, where there are so many different aspects which come together to define digital product design. There is physical aspect, there's spatial aspect, and there's communication aspect, and different elements in these different aspects which come together. Like some part of industrial design, and some part of architectural design, and some part of graphic design, some part of branding and marketing, and putting all these elements together to deliver a full product which can be bought into the market is called as the digital product design. It is where a designer oversees everything from the past to future and the process of it, validating solutions, creating solutions, and redefining the problems and verifying it with the real users. All of this comes under the entire process of digital product design, and and the product designer oversees all of this from beginning to end. So the next topic is understanding UI and UX design. Before we move on to understanding and designing UI, let's try and understand what is the history of UI and where it started from. By understanding this, it will give us an idea of how design has evolved and what is expected and how we should be designing for the future generations. Looking back at the history of UI, the first graphical user interface, which is the GUI, was actually developed by a group of scientists at the Xerox PARC. Before this, interacting with a computer was a very hard process. User had to know the communicating language or the programming language. So it was not meant for everyday users or people who are not coders or people who are not aware of what a programming language is. But the idea was to bring in the personal computers and make sure each one of them are able to use these computers. So a group of scientists were developing on an interacting user interface. This was like a groundbreaking innovation for whatever was going to come next. They used some elements like an icon, a button, and menus, which we use till date. And this was first used in Xerox PARC, which was later progressed and used in Macintosh 128, which was the first personal computer. Uh, and it also included a point and a mouse, and it was commercially sold, and it was a successful for home computers where everyday users could interact with computers. And this is what changed the idea of using computers, and it revolutionized the whole idea of computers and laptops and everything which that followed. Okay, so what is graphical user interface? What we see here is represented in a picture is also a graphical user interface. So graphical user interface has visual components, like they're interactive visual components, and they're defined in ways which the user can easily interact with. They're represented as icons and they convey some sort of information. And they also change according to the screens or according to the product which we are interacting with. They have different colors, sizes, visibility, and the way we interact with them is also different. And we have evolved in so many different ways with interacting with our products. If you actually look at this example, this is an iOS example and this is a Windows example of maybe the recent times of graphical user interface. But this third image, if you carefully look at it, it actually shows the process of how these graphical user interface have been evolved to what it is currently. So there is a 95, 98, there's 2000, and then it slowly progressed to this current user interface where it's like an absolute flat design. Okay. So, what is UI design? So, UI is based on a lot of these elements, these visual elements, and this is where design theory and principles of design is very important for us to understand to even start designing. So, we're going to look into uh, some important elements with some examples to understand design and elements of design. So, design theory is basically fundamentals or some principles which will help us in creating some uh, visual communication. So, it is we are trying to convey and communicate and interact with the users. So, this design theory is going to help us build that. And basically, design theory is mainly consists of two different things, which is the elements of design and principles of design. We will individually look at each aspects of this, which comes under elements of design, and also these different terms which fall under principles of design. Let's begin with elements of design. So, elements of design. What We'll start off with the most basic thing, which is a line. So what is a line? Lines are a stroke. It's a stroke which connects 2 points. So there is an organic line and there's a geometric line. Geometric is with angles and organic is mostly like a curve or a more smoother line. So I have put in an example here to understand why even a line is important in designing a graphical interface graphical user interface. Where if you carefully look at this is an example of today's Dunzo app, where you can see a grid which is used by these simple lines to differentiate the different products or the different services they avail. It is the most important aspect they're trying to convey, and they are trying to convey this by these aspects like line. And I have another example here of Google Podcast where they have used lines to define their logo. So this is how, if you actually look at the most simple elements, play like such a large role in communicating and defining interactions with the user. The second one is shapes. Shapes are self-contained areas which are usually formed by a line. It has two dimensions, which is the length and the width. You see a length and a width. I have a simple example of an interaction here where we see it every day on our mobile devices, which is giving us the idea of the network signal, the strength of the network we use. There are two different ways of indicating it, and this is defined again by different shapes. What you see here is individual bar-like shapes, and we can understand the strength of it. What you see here is a more angular, defined shape, and we can still understand the strength of it. So this is again, you're trying to give some information to the user, and how the user sees it, and all of this forms a part of interaction. What is value? Value is simply the light or the dark. I have an example here, which this is a user interface of Uber, where I want to explain the importance of light and dark value. If you look at this example here, you can see how the ride icon is dark, which is conveying to the user that you have selected this option of ride. Whereas the order food here is light, which is conveying the user that this hasn't been selected. So a simple value of light and dark is conveying a major message of the user interaction, which is letting the user know what has been selected. But it is as simple as a value. The next one is the texture. Texture is nothing but the quality or the surface level quality of an object. An object what you see here is a simple shape, okay, but you can see that there is some sort of a texture on it. It may be that the surface is rough or it has some particular patterns on it. So this is a simple example of how iOS used textures in communicating to the users. I will just explain it to you all. If you all can carefully look at it, you can see how the icons have evolved from this to what we currently see. You can from the initial phase, it slowly developed to becoming a more minimalistic and a flat design. But initially, the design used to have some sort of glare here, which was supposed to indicate the reflection of a glass. And if you look at the Safari logo, they had a compass and the world map behind, indicating that you can search the entire World Wide Web. So these are the different aspects they're trying to bring in through texture. And again, in between, if you see, they've introduced some strokes, which I have a blown up icon image here. This is to give the three-dimensional depth of touching a surface, including the reflection of a glass. So it's slowly progressed, and the ideas of using these icons and designs have evolved to using more minimalistic and flat icons. This is a simple example I've put in here to let you all know how these different elements of design and principles of design are going to come together even in designing the most simplest, what we see today as the most simplest web page or an app. This is the search engine of Google, and you can see how there are different aspects of design and principles of design used here. So we are going to move on to the next aspect, which is one of the most important. Everything we move on from here is going to be important, but this is one of the most important aspects in designing a user interface, and this is color theory. As simple as it might be, but it conveys a lot of information, and it conveys what your brand is and what your product is and how users perceive it. Color theory is used basically to convey information to users, and it plays a large role in understanding um, the essence of a product or the what do you say, like importance of the product. If you all had actually looked at my pre-workshop questionnaire, I had a question on what is the most common color which is used probably in banking apps or apps which are related to you exchanging money and used for transferring money and anything to do with money. If you actually look closely to it, and try and understand it, the most common color is blue, which is I can give you some example like Google Pay, Paytm, PayPal. All of these use different shades of blue because this imparts some sort of trust in the user, and it also imparts some sense of coolness and calmness in a user. And this is important because the user is dealing with money, which is important for anybody, and the develop this trust, and the user has to feel this calmness while using the product. So the color plays a very large role, larger than what we actually understand it to be. A little more in depth and understand what these color theory is. I've just put in a infographic here for you all to understand. So RGB is the color scheme which is largely used for designing screens, and it is it is seen as tiny dots on the screen. If that's how the colors appear, and CMKY is mostly used for printing purposes. The way colors appear when we use an RGB on a screen is different. Let's understand some more about these colors. So there are basic colors, which is the primary colors. The yellow, there is yellow, there's red, and there's blue. These form the most basic colors, which is the primary colors. From these is where they arrive the secondary colors. So if you mix two of these primary colors, two of these primary colors, or any of these two primary colors, is when we arrive a secondary color, which is nothing but green, purple, and orange. And next, what we see is variants of orange, variants of yellow and green, variants of blue and purple and red. This forms the basic color wheel, and it is important for us to understand these colors in our color wheel. There are also different elements, like there's a set of warm colors which are they sort of used in making or warning a person, or they can be used in they're used in so many aspects of design, like food packaging, they always use red or orange, like KFC or McD, and they've always used warm colors because it has to be attractive, and it also gives out this feeling of hunger when the user is constantly looking at the colors like red and yellow. If you actually really have paid attention, you can see how the architecture and the branding and everything of these food industries are mostly in and around red and yellow. Example: Burger King, McD's, KFC, Pizza Hut. You name anything, they always have these color scheme of warm. And let's look at a digital product like Zomato has red in it, Swiggy has orange in it. So each color conveys a message, and the user perceives it in different ways. This is warm colors. Then we also have cool colors, which I spoke about initially, which is like shades of blue and purple, which is more calmer and soothing, and anything where there is importance like money involved in it. A lot of these products use a blue color, and even physically, like the SBI uses blue color for their logo, and Google Pay uses blue color. This is to build in confidence with the users and gain some trust of the users. Let's see what else is there. There is analogous colors, colors that are next to each other on a color wheel. So this is a color wheel. Whatever is next to each other, they are analogous colors. So it can be blue and purple, it can be blue and green, it can be orange and yellow. So anything next to each other on the color wheel is analogous color. Complementary colors are which colors are opposite to each other. It can be yellow and purple. It can also be green and orange. It can be red and green. Anything which is directly opposite to each other form complementary colors. This can be used in various ways in a digital product. So if you want to emphasize a particular button where you want the user to click on it, then you can use absolutely contrasting color to gain the attention of the user on that button. And there's more like triadic colors and split complementary. Let's not get into too much of this, but I also quickly want to shed light on grayscale and monochromatic. This is important because we might build products which can be only monochromatic, that is used with a single color. It is a single color, but we are using different shades or hues of it. So there can be 100% color, there can be at 65% and 35%. So these are different hues of it, of the single color or of one color. So we can build products using only one color, but having different hues and variants of that color. I can't really think of a product right now, but we'll see later. If I have an example, we could talk about it. And then grayscale is important because all our text and other actions which we want to gray out, and if we want to focus on action buttons, then the usage of this grayscale plays a very large role. So the intensity of black to white is nothing but a grayscale. So there is black at 100%, there's black at 65%, and black at 35%. We largely, we do use a lot of these grayscale aspects in designing our user interface. Just let's understand more in depth on how these color theories and elements of colors are used in an actual user interface. So to distinguish, just to start understanding of these color theory, there are three important things we have to remember. One is the primary color, secondary color, and light and dark variants of these colors. If you look at this, it's a very simple user interface, and you can see that purple color or this color, which is primary purple, is largely used in this entire user interface. So a primary color is something which is most frequently used in your app. or on your screens, which should define your components, to define your status bar, or define other elements in your user interface. You can also have different variants of the same color. This is what I was talking about when I spoke about monochromatic colors. So there can be lighter variants of one color and there can be darker variants of that single color. And this is what you see here, purple color and different variants of that which the designer has used here. You can further understand this in a lot of depth if you just can find information on material.io design. I have some links here you all can look into. This is where they talk about color system in depth. I have picked up some few points which are important for us to understand even before delving into the UI design. And the next aspect is secondary color. Secondary color can be a complementary color. It can be any variant of it also. So what we see here is primary color is going to be purple and secondary color is going to be a teal or a cyan, or let's call it teal. And it can be variants of that color. Then we have achromatic colors or grayscale, which is black and white. We also have some errors, which is absolutely contrasting to all the colors, which is red. It is important. All these individually play a role in conveying information to users. We will try and understand with examples on how this is done. I have picked up these examples from Material Design, material.io. This is basically a set of rules for developing Android products. And you can understand everything from color theories to grids and everything else, which I'm going to further discuss. I've put in an example here, and I wanted you all to understand as a side-by-side comparison of how only use of a single color and how there is the use of primary and secondary color. There is also surface color, background color, and error color. Surface is what these cards, individual cards, consist of, what color it is. Background is the plain white background you see for any user interface. And error is when we are trying to show the user that this data is not available, or whatever you've entered is not the right information you're looking for. So anything you want to indicate to the user to take action is an error. We're using a red. Okay, so I have just put in some examples here. What we see here is an interface of a big basket, and I put in that interface here so that we identify what is the primary color and we see how they've used it here. So if you look at it, green is largely used, and that is their brand color and the primary color in the product. And you can also see some grayscale where they've used the intensity of the black is varying, so obviously it's gray. And how they've used black to highlight some text, how they've used red to make it an action button, red for informing the user in terms of notification. But they've also used green in different aspects of their product. You're talking about the price, you're talking about and once is also going color primary action button is also going to be green in color. So this is how you colors and how we can use primary color in different aspects in conveying how much information to the user. This is another example where this is again from material design, and there are different which is used for primary color, and they've used one single color. Like yellow is the primary color here, blue is the primary color here, and pink is the primary color here, and it shows the different screens. If you can also use 2 or 3 primary colors itself to make a combination and really bring out these products to life. So moving on, the next aspect of design is a typography. This again plays a very large role because most of our content is in written language, and how we present this on our devices is very important. And this has to be legible, it has to be readable, and it also has to be appealing when they display it in different types of devices and different sizes of devices. So it is important for us to understand what typography is and how it works. But there are some things we have to understand when it comes to typography, and I'll talk about the most important elements. Like this is an example of what forms the anatomy of a typeface. A typeface is nothing but like a font, and fonts are a part of typeface. There can be different fonts for one particular typeface. To understand this anatomy, we should look at it in depth. So I've just put here like an infographic where you can quickly understand what are these different aspects of typography. Again, this is from material design, and there is further more information on each of these elements. You can read about it and spend more time in understanding this. The more you spend, the better it is for you to place these elements while designing. What we have to really understand here is what is a baseline. So baseline is where all your fonts or alphabets are sitting on. So this is very important when we are placing our text on a screen. And this is again important, which is leading, which is the height, or the how do I put it in simple terms, like it is the distance between one baseline and the other baseline. So the spacing is very important because it should the text should be readable and should be more understandable, legible to all different users. And we also have to understand this letter spacing. This is the spacing between each alphabet in a sentence or in a word. There's a spacing between each alphabet in a word. So I think these are some of the different aspects. If you look at also height, like a cap height is the height of the capital letters in your sentences, and X height is the height of your small letters in a word or a sentence. Yeah. So again, this is from material design. I've just placed it here so that we can understand how baseline and values of it is really important in placing elements in our UI design. So what you see here as 32 and 32 is like the distance between the baseline of this and the baseline of this. And you can also see the placement of these elements and the spacing of these elements are important in how we convey something to the user. So they know this is like a heading, this is a subtitle, and this is the body. There has to be differences and spacing differences and height differences and difference in your alphabets and fonts and everything to convey or make the user understand all the information in simple ways. Okay, moving on. This is weight. This is weight, which is again a very important aspect, and it's a very ignored aspect, I would say, but it plays a very large role in understanding anything we're trying to convey to the user. So what you see here is weight is nothing but like the thickness of a font stroke. Strokes are what forms a font. And there are different weights available. The most basic weights which are used are light, regular, medium, and bold. So when you want to convey something very strongly, or you want your users' attention to be there, be the first thing when they land on the page, then you could use something with a heavy weight, which can be a bold weight, and that would be like the headline. And I've just put like a comparison here so we can understand what is the headline and then what is the font sizes. And so they've used a Roboto of medium weight and 20 height. So this is like a side-by-side comparison of it. You can see for each card they have a similar thing. And you can see weight here says regular, here it says medium. So this is more thicker than this. And then there is Roboto regular here and here. But they are of 10 and 14 size. So they're smaller than this headline. So this is how you can use typography and typography and weight to convey information to users. This is again a side-by-side comparison of distances between baseline and the font sizes of how the user can comfortably read one, and there's a lot of information, but it might not be the most legible or the readable solution here. Yeah, so there are a lot of different fonts like serif, sans serif, monospace. These are all different types of fonts. And if you want to understand more on fonts and typography, do look into Material.io. That is for designing for Androids. And this is googlefonts.com, from where you can find a lot of fonts, where you can also download a lot of free fonts which are used. You can select categories, like if you want a sans serif or a serif type, want equally spaced, that is monospacing. There are different types of fonts which you can download and explore, and you can filter it on your basis and your needs for that particular product. I have put in an example here to understand what is a system font for an Android and a system font for an iOS. Roboto system font for Android and San Francisco system font for iOS. And you can also look at the colors in this. Okay, so this is an example put in here just to understand how typography plays a very large role in conveying any understanding or anything that we want to convey to user. So if you pay attention here, you can see how Get Started with Framer today is absolutely bold. The weight is on a bold side, and they also used color here to convey information and encourage the users to sign up. So you can see sign up for a free account in blue. So it's an action. So they want to convey it, and they made it bolder and bigger. So typography plays a larger role in a large role, like you have to have some information put up there, and the user cannot miss it. Then this typography is where you can use it in simple ways like typography to convey that information. So moving on, another important aspect of elements of design is iconography. Iconography uses color and style in graphical way to communicate to users. So this is an example of how icons were used in Xerox Spark. You can see there are some abstract shapes for defining folders and computers and documents, and some of it is still used in probably different shapes and sizes even currently. Basically like an abstract shape to represent an idea. Yeah, I have a couple of examples here, and I have some simple things we need to remember while we are thinking of using icons or even designing icons. We'll just look into it one by one. So when you're using icons, it has to be extremely clear, and you have to be able to understand it immediately. Like if you look at this Dunzo example, you can see they have a puppy icon here, which directly implicates that it's related to pet and supplies. and it has to be meaningful. It has to convey some information of value. Icons have to be recognizable. It should be something common that the users see it every day and they can relate it to what we are trying to talk about. It has to be simple. It shouldn't be overdone or extremely starking, or it shouldn't be perceived in different ways. It shouldn't have multiple meanings, and it shouldn't be too much of an effort for a user to understand what that icon is. It should also be scalable. You should be able to use it on different sizes and resolutions of screen without having to change much, or without having to lose the essence of that icon, or the unity of or the integrity of that icon. And it has to be consistent. The set of icons used in any product should be consistent throughout, and it should look the same no matter in what places or where you're using throughout the product. Let's look at this example to understand all of these here. If you look at Dunzo, use extremely similar looking color scheme and similar looking style of icon. So they're trying to maintain some sort of consistency. And of course, they have a little bit of detailed icons here, but it is their product style, and they want to have these detailed icons. But they're all, but if you actually look at it, they have a meaning to it. They're conveying information through meaning. Like if you look at this meat and fish, they have a proper identification icon of whatever they're talking about. And they look at groceries, they have a proper information from the icon trying to understand that. And then there are packages, which is the icon is very clearly conveys the meaning that it's a package, and all of these have a definite style, and they maintaining consistency in that. Let's look at another example, which is Uber. Uber is using icons, but in a very subtle way, and but it is still giving out and communicating with the users, and the interaction is much more better with the use of icons. Like ride, they've used such simple icons like ride and order food and your current location and whatever location you have already started, like you keep traveling to a frequency. Then we also have this icon here. We have an icon here which is important. So this is how they're using extremely clear but trying to convey the message, and it's super meaningful. Yeah, looking back at Dunzo, there are actually two sets of icons they're using. One is like the more defined way of conveying their services, and then you can also see the navigation bar and then cart and all. They have a specific style which is super simple. Moving on to the next aspect of elements of design, this is about layout. Again, this is very important. Just like color theory, iconography, and what else did we look at? Colors, iconography. Just quickly go back. Typography, yes. So we looked at colors, typography, and iconography. This is another aspect which is equally important, which is the layout. So all of these elements which we learned, which we looked at before, is going to come together in a layout. Layout is something where all your UI elements form a pattern, or they are placed in this main UI region. If I have to divide it, or if I have to explain it the most simple way, layout is arrangement of things on UI screen. And there are three aspects which form the main layout, which is first one is a column, which you see are these pink bands. They are column-like, and the space between these columns is the gutter. This is the gutter, which is blue, and margins are on the either end of the screen. And we'll try and understand why we need a margin, why we need a gutter, what are these different types of layouts, and how it varies for each screen size, resolution, and all of that. As developers and as designers, both, we have to understand all these aspects in bringing out a usable product. Let's understand what are the different types of grids. So there are two types of grids. One is a fluid grid and a fixed grid. Fluid grids are where these UI elements like card sizes and other elements placed will resize itself according to the size of the screen. You can see everything is moving. The inner aspects like columns and gutters and cards and all of them are getting adjusted. This is using responsive design. Fixed grids. Fixed grids is where the card sizes and elements are fixed and everything else is in place except for the margins, which is the either end of the screen is going to expand. Again, this is another type of responsive design. So this is very important when we are doing for looking at responsive design, where we're going to have one design fit into different sizes or resolutions of devices. Again, I have taken these information from material.io because there's like a standard set of rules and I wanted to familiarize all of you with this. You can further understand all of this and read more about it on material.io. You can see the link here. I'll also share it with all of you. I have some examples here so that we can understand what is a fixed grid and a fluid grid. Fixed grid is where only the margins are moving. So you can see this till here, the end of the screen is where your margin is. It's the same with here. All of these are fixed and this is your margin cell. So depending on what device you're seeing, the screen will adjust itself, but only the margins are varying. And all these elements like the cars, the search box and every other elements placed in your UI region is going to be central and they are not going to move. And this is another example of Spotify. This was booking.com. This is another example of Spotify. The web player is a fluid grid where one section of it is actually we'll understand it later. It is fixed, but if you look at this is the grid layout where if the response, it's a more responsive layout. If you move the sizes of this, everything here in this UI region will get adjusted automatically. It's the text size, this icon, all these content, and each information placed here is going to get adjusted accordingly to the size of it. You can move in and move out and you can understand that. So what is a UI region? UI region is where all your UI elements come into place and that is the main region where all of it is located. If you look at this is actually an example which is constantly moving from a desktop view to a laptop, to a iPad or a tablet view, and then it's moving to a mobile view. And we can also see how the elements are getting adjusted and their interactions are changing. This is a part of responsive design and it is very important as developers to know this. Okay, moving on to UI regions, there are different types of UI regions and this will also largely dictate in designing and how we want to place our UI elements. So there is something called as a permanent UI region that cannot be that can be displayed outside of the responsive grid. And then this is the example which I was talking about earlier, which is Spotify web player. So my responsive grid is only this part where you can see the pink columns. And this is not part of my responsive grid layout. So this is a permanent region. It is always going to be there. You see a similar way here, similar way of using this, just Spotify. They've used this area to be a permanent UI region where this is not going to move no matter what, but all the content here in this region is adjusted according to the size of the device. These are permanent UI regions. And then there is persistent UI regions which appear based on some action. They can appear and disappear if the user takes an action. So I have an example here of Google Drive. It's a very simple example of what we see every day, but we wouldn't have noticed all of this. I'll play that again for you. So UI region, if I click on something like the menu, it's going to appear for some time. I can take action and then I can make it disappear. And then the larger area appears. So if you look at this is an example of Google Drive where there is an option. I can click on this and then I can see how the bar next to it or the menu next to it is appearing and disappearing, and accordingly the grids and the rest of the UI region is getting adjusted. Temporary UI region. This is it's a temporary layer which comes over your grid, and you can take the necessary action you want without disturbing the rest of the grid. So the rest of the grid happens in the background and is there for a temporary time until you finish your actions or whatever your agenda was. You finish that and then move on. So nothing else is disturbed. So the responsive grid in the background is not disturbed. A very simple example is again Google Drive on a mobile interface. When I click on the menu, I can see this temporary UI region which appears and I can take the necessary action I want. I can go back to this gray area, which is the UI, the main grid layout of all the contents in my Google Drive. So that has been so far all the different elements of design. Next, we're going to move on to principles of design. So we finished understanding what is design theory, what are these different elements of design theory. We looked at line, shape, value, textures, color theory, typography, iconography, and layouts. Now we're going to look at principles of design, where all these different elements come together in certain principles. And again, this plays a larger role when you're looking at it from a user experience point of view and how the user sees and interacts with it, whereas these are the elements which form the design. And Gestalt, which you see here, is a more like a psychology part of UX. We will further explore it. That's a whole different principle of design, and it has several other aspects to it. And we look at it in depth as much as we can, and I have examples for each of it so that we can relate to whatever we've used and understand it better. This is an infographic of showing all the different design principles and elements, and these are principles of Gestalt psychology, which plays a large role in defining user experience for products. Let's just give me a minute, please. Okay, let's move on. So the next aspect of principles of design is hierarchy. Again, I'm using a couple of examples of Ether websites and Ether products here because I'm quite familiar and I know different aspects of how they've used principles of design and elements of design. So here's an example of Ether, and I want to talk about hierarchy here. So hierarchy shows difference of importance or difference in importance of different elements on the design. It can be through color, it can be through size, it can be through scale, or highlighting a primary button, or highlighting a heading by using larger fonts. So if you look at this, they've showcased the product as the main element of the website or the screen, and there's absolutely nothing in around. So they're trying to create this hierarchy by focusing on this and then driving the user to the content next, which is again, there is a little bit of hierarchy from here to here. They've used bigger, bolder image and then more smaller text to arrive at that hierarchy. There are a couple of more examples here for hierarchy. Again, I've used as we we're talking about hierarchy. Again, this is an example of 450, and you can see how they've created some sort of hierarchy by using this extremely large image of their product and then driving the user to read about this. You can understand how they've used a little bit of hierarchy even in placement of the text and using of this typography. Like intelligent is smaller and powered by intelligence is a little bigger. So it can be used in various ways. Another very good example here is Airbnb. This is during the COVID times how their website has changed and how they're trying to convey a message to the user saying we may be apart but we'll get through this together. So they're trying to convey a message to the user, and they've done this through hierarchy and typography where they've highlighted this the most so that the user's attention is on the message and they understand what is the situation and how whatever Airbnb as a company are trying to convey to the user. It's standing out the most when comparing to the rest of the elements. They are balanced. Design appears to be more calmer. It appears to be more natural to the user. It imbibes a feeling of calmness, and the user is stable through using a product. Again, here it's an example of Aether 450X where they've placed their elements in the UI region in the most balanced way. It can also be symmetry. Symmetry and balance are related to each other, where they create equal or even distribution of elements and even distribution of space on the screen, and using similar elements and creating this sense of calmness where the user doesn't find it frustrating to understand the information, or he is not irritated to find what he wants, like probably the main action button. So it is important that all these elements are balanced and they are and it's easy for the user to use the product. The next element is scale, and I've taken an example of iPhone 11 Pro website. Actually, is a website. I recommend all of you to go through and look at Apple website and how they're showcasing each of their product. The website itself is beautifully done, and they have all these elements and principles of design used in different ways. Here I want to talk about how they've used scale, and they've done it wonderfully well to emphasize what they want to. This is an example where they're talking about their camera on the new product. There is a 11 Pro, and if you look at it carefully in the background, it's the image of the product, and they've completely scaled it up only to focus on the camera. This is how scale can create an impact, and it can create an emphasis on that particular element. They've also used some sort of hierarchy and typography to create the overall impact. Again, there's an example of Apple from their website, and this is MacBook Air. I want to talk about dominance, which is nothing but creating focus on one single element, and here they're trying to create focus on their product. And dominance can be achieved in so many different ways, like using an image which can be like a hero image. I've done it through typography here, an extreme contrast of black and white, and the scale of the product they're using here. Also, a dominance of this action button here just by the use of color. If you look at it, it is extremely opposite of the colors which is used in the rest of the screen, and it is creating a dominant on the primary action button. We want the users moving on. We're moving to principles of design, and we're looking at Gestalt's theory. Gestalt's principle is important because we are looking and understanding about the psychology of the human brain when we're talking about Gestalt. And to understand why the human brain behaves in a certain way it does. There are a lot of other various UX laws like Fitts laws and Hick law. They all come under UX, and the most important, the common psychological theory which is used is a Gestalt theory, which can directly be translated on the UI or the user interface screen. And we'll look at each one of it. This is again an infographic where they're trying to communicate different aspects. We look at each one of it with an example and try and understand it. I also have a small video here just to make you all understand about it. We can just play it here.
When looking at this, what's the first thing you see? Do you see a bicycle? Or do you see handlebars, pedals, spokes, tires, brakes, a seat, and a frame? If you're human, I'm guessing you saw a bike. This idea that we make sense of things by seeing a whole rather than the individual parts is called Gestalt psychology. Its principles are especially important for designers in creating complete and compelling visuals. Because of psychologists Max Wertheimer, Kurt Koffka, and Wolfgang Kohler, Gestalt theory can be broken down into 6 design principles. Figure ground. The thought that when we look at a scene, we separate objects so that some of the focus or figure and others of the background. Similarity. The notion that we place objects with similar characteristics in a group. These characteristics can include color, size, font, shape, texture, and more. Proximity. The belief that we group together objects that are close to each other. Closure. The idea that our minds close objects that are not necessarily together or complete in order to create a whole. Continuity. The theory that we continue to follow objects that are visually aligned until they are interrupted. Order. The belief that alignment and symmetry are attractive and essential elements of design. When Gestalt principles are ignored, designs tend to look incomplete, forcing our eyes to focus on little inconsistencies rather than the greater whole. You may not know exactly what seems off, but you will feel something is out of place. The best designs, unintentionally, make the world feel a little less chaotic.
So you can also, I'll share the link and you can all look at it, look at the video on your own. What is Gestalt theory? Gestalt theory was actually developed by a group of psychologists in Germany, and they had certain principles in which they put together, and they called it Gestalt theory. They had, along with other different things like grid theory and golden ratio theory, Gestalt was also one of the main important design rules, which was followed then and is still followed today. So Gestalt means unified whole. That we don't really perceive these elements, human doesn't perceive smaller elements as individuals, they perceive it as a larger whole. We'll try and understand this with examples and how they use an everyday user graphical interface now. And this is again like a simple infographic where you can easily understand what is proximity, continuation, closure, and similarity. Through Gestalt. Let's look at each thing individually. The first one is proximity. This is an example of Google Pay. Yeah, okay. So you can see how all of these icons all of these icons are placed in a cluster or in a group, and it is divided by this line. So because of how closely they are placed, the proximity of that the locations of these icons and how they're located to each other, we understand that this is a group or a cluster, and we understand that this is a different group or a cluster. Although they're similar in shape and they look the same, only by these distances, the separation of distances and how they cluster to each other will give us the idea that they are of different groups. It's the same principle used here also, which is Netflix. There's a mobile view of it. We can see they're similar shape and they're closer to each other. And again, they have some distance here, whereas these are similar in shape and they're closer to each other. There is a gap here with this. So we understand that this is a preview section and this is like a my list section, and then this is a continue watching for this section. So this is one unit maybe, and this is like a separate preview unit. Depends on how we perceive it. So again, we are seeing it as clusters, and okay, I see this as a list, I see this as another list, and I see this as another list. So proximity plays a role like this. Similarity. Similarity can be used in different ways, like creating similar elements on the screen, creating similar action buttons so that the user is familiar throughout the screen of what is the action button. Here you can see learn more. It is different colors, but it is extremely similar. They are exactly the same. So no matter what or how, in different colors you use for your action buttons, but because of the style and similarity, the user will tend to understand what it is. I have another example here, which is Make My Trip user interface. So here I want to show you, or I want you all to understand how they use color to bring in the elements of similarity. Like when you talk about flights, they're represented in blue, and anything related to flight is also represented in blue, like visa services and airport cabs. Again, we're talking about hotels, and something similar to hotels is villas and apartments and home, and they're all represented in one color. It's the same when it comes to trains and metros, bus and cabs. They're all one mode of different modes of transport. So they have one color to represent all of this. Again, with holiday package, they're doing the same way. So again, I want all of you to understand how different aspects like what we spoke in terms of icons and colors also come together in this psychological gestalt theory, which can be used and can be used in different principles. To have some few examples here to understand continuation and closure. Continuation, this is mostly used in, we've seen this interaction a lot, maybe in our dashboards or desktop views, where we see like a continuous color band which is uniting all these elements. So we understand that this is like a bar and we can toggle between each element. Imagine if we didn't have this red bar and we didn't have even this red bar, then maybe the representation and the usage and the understanding of the user would be different. And closure. So closure is what we perceive when something is not even complete. Like I have a simple example of the loading bar here. Somehow the user or the human brains tend to complete the image. Here we know it is loading. We understand that it's loading. So we kind of see that even if it is incomplete, the circle is incomplete, and we see it's happening in step, we know, okay, this is a loading bar and it's taking time, and we see it as a circle. So this is a closure. Another Gestalt theory is symmetry, and I've used some examples to understand this. This is Google Keep Notes, where they've used a symmetry to create a sense of balance, even though the card sizes and the styles are different. The app itself is kind of balanced because of two divisions of this side, the left hand side and the right hand side, and how balanced they appear to be. Again, this is Zomato. This example is Zomato, and this is a desktop view of Zomato, and I wanted to share how this is an absolute symmetry. The number of cards they're placed, the margin size, what comes on left hand side and what comes on right hand side can be overlapped. Like literally, they're absolutely symmetrical. Even their search bars and all of that is symmetrical. So you can carefully try and start noticing these elements in all the products you all use every day, and see how, in a very subtle way, but they do have a large impact on our users. The next aspect is moving on to understanding different UI elements. Let's understand these elements which are used on everyday basis, and or or there are certain elements which have been defined already and the users are used to using these elements, and we'll identify them. We'll try and identify them and understand them, and we'll also have a small guided exercise where we do it together to see these elements. Um, User interface elements. So these are components or parts which actually build an app or a website. They are used for interactions, and they use as a type of input or a communication tool for the users with the product. And there are some certain set of user elements which are already been defined and used, and we just to maintain that what do you say, efficiency of completing a task by the user, it is good that we reuse these elements which have already been defined. And by using, there's absolutely nothing wrong in using an element which is newly designed, or you come up with a new element, but we should think about how aware a user is and how familiar the user is, and we should not disturb their mental model of how they've been using all these products. It can be simple elements like a button and scroll bar and menu items, and all of this come under user interface elements. They are nothing but parts or different elements which form or build the app, and which build an app or a website. So there are different types of user elements, which is input components, navigation components, information components, and containers. We look at each one of them with examples. Controls. This is nothing but when a user is able to put in an input, or look for something, or they're able to type in something or check in something. There's an input from the user for an action to appear, like a button, or like a search field, or a text field, or a drop down, or a checkbox. So there's an input from the user for the action. Navigational component. This helps the user to navigate themselves through the entire product. A simple example is probably a menu on your apps, or what we see here is a navigational bar or the home bar, where you have all these aspects. So you can navigate from your user profile to notifications to folders to deleted profile, or it is helping you navigate through that product. Information. Okay, just about navigational product, we also have something called as what is it? Breadcrumbs. We'll see how, probably in our exercise we can try and identify that. They have like information of where you started, which page you are in, and what are you doing. Like, which is the first page you started off, what are the pages you have looked through, and what page you are on currently. That is called as a breadcrumb. It's like a small information we provide. So that is also like a navigational component. Maybe we could see this in our exercise, and if I could think of examples, maybe Wikipedia. Wikipedia might be a good example to look at to understand navigational components. Next one is informational components. Informational components is where we're trying to give out some information the most simplest way for the user, and the user is not spending too much time on understanding this. It can be as simple as a notification, like the swipe notifications we get, drop-down notifications we get, and can also be a small notification like this on that particular app, where we're identifying how many number of messages and how many number of chats. So this is also giving an information to the user. This comes under information components. And what we have here is a toast message, like we're confirming to the user that we are sending a message. So this comes under informational component. Anything which gives information to the user based on their actions, or you want the user to take an action, is called informational component. Next one is called as a container. We've seen this a lot. Probably we've used various websites and apps. This is called as an accordion, where there is a heading, and when you click down, there's a list of things which appear. So it's containing a list of things in it. Let's see if we can look at some examples in our exercise. And yeah, so similarly, this is also like a drop-down menu. So when you click on it, then we have like a list of things which appear, and each of them have their own content in it. So this acts as a container when it's containing this list. Okay, so before we move on, let's understand what we have done so far. So we have done what is UI UX design. We've also understood a little bit of history of UI design. We've looked at what is design theory. We've also understood elements of design theory, principles of design, and UI elements. So we've covered most parts of what is design and how to start designing, history of designing, and all of it. Further moving on, we'll start identifying all these elements in existing products. We'll understand some industry standard rules and regulations or design standards or developer standards for different devices like Android and iOS, and different devices also. And we will further see on how we can create these screens and understand the tools used in creating these UI. Before we move on to that, let's just quickly look at anatomy of a mobile and web. This is just a brief idea I'm giving you all. Even before we start designing that, I would probably be using terms, and I know that a lot of you are not familiar with it. So just understand what these elements are. This is a brief anatomy, okay? When you look at a mobile screen from a designer point or a developer point of view, we can see like a status bar, a navigational bar, which is nothing but navigation, which we spoke like a UI element, navigating the users. There's a tool bar, then there's a home indicator bar. Even this can act as a navigation bar. This is a navigation bar because we can probably search something. This is your main UI region. You can see the dotted lines which act as the margin. And you can see different types of cards. So yeah, this is like a very basic anatomy of a mobile screen. I've put in an example here. Again, it's Make My Trip. Just for you all to understand what is a navigation bar, what is a status bar, which is our main UI region, where are the different types of cards, which is a home or a toolbar. Again, this can be a navigation bar. So the next time you look into an app or you're using an app, do try and understand what are these different elements and the basic anatomy they followed. I think it's a common anatomy followed through all our mobile devices. Mostly this. And coming to web, web is very simple. This is just an anatomy. The way you place contents and the way you place your elements can really vary from each website. I've taken a very basic example to understand where is our header. There's a navigational menu. Then we place our main content. Then we can have content on both the sides, and there's a footer. So this is how a web page or a website will look. If you look at this, we have home, about us, and all of that, where we have blogs. So this can be a navigational menu. This is our hero image, a banner. Our header can be this with our logo. This is our main content location. So how they have placed their content can vary from our anatomy. And again, we have some sub-content here. And we have a footer, which is this. It's a basic anatomy of a web layout. And this is a basic anatomy of a mobile layout. Do pay attention to all of this when you all are using products further. Okay, now coming to the guided exercise, I have a small activity planned for all of us. You can pick any of these three websites and identify as many as design elements or principles which we have discussed so far, and make a list of all these UI elements or design principles and theory, whatever, like principles and elements and UI elements, whatever you can remember, whatever you can identify, whatever is used and you think has been used, please do make a list of it. We will take about 5 minutes and we'll look at it individually, and then we can discuss. I will also be doing the same, and I'm going to look at Amazon, so we can look at it. And I'm going to make a list of all the elements and interactions, transitions, whatever I think falls under whatever we've discussed today: elements, principles, design theory, interactions, transitions. We're going to look at all of these aspects. So pick any of these three websites, or you can pick something of your own. If you want to do Amazon, I'm going to be doing Amazon, so we can verify and check later on what we're doing. So yeah, you can always take some products and look at all the elements and the principles of design and elements used. The next topic is moving on to rules of iOS and Android. There are a certain set of rules which have been defined, and some sort of standard it's catered to a larger group of users all over the world. There's some set for iOS and there's some set for Android. I might not be looking at it in depth, but I will share these links, and I'll just open these links and show you the type of content which we have access to, and what we could learn from there for designing for different devices. And this is like a developer version of it. Even as developers and design, we have to be fully aware of whatever the set of rules are. And then there is accessibility guidelines, which is very, very important in designing for people who are challenged in so many ways. It can be visually impaired. It can be people with some color blindness. There are different aspects we need to look at when we're designing, and we need to be really careful about this, that we are catering to all different types of users. So for that, it is the w3.org. So designing for web accessibility, there are a lot of tips on designing for this. There are tips for how to develop and different content, and how not to use a color, how to use a color, how to space your text so that someone who's visually impaired and the device is reading out to them, it should be easy for the device to read it out. So how to place your text, and just simple things, but really important elements like this, they play a large role in defining how successful your product can be, and how it should stand out from the rest of the product. So there's a lot of information here. You all can how to use color to convey information, text boxes, placement, a lot of it. This is only in terms of designing. We have tips for writing, and there are a lot of accessibility design and development. You can test and evaluate what you have designed, developing for web. All of this, this website is like a standard, and it's a set of rules we as designers and developers have to follow. You can see some standards and guidelines here in designing for devices, in designing for web. That's about W3, and let's look at iOS. We have two things. This is designing for Apple platforms, iPad, Mac, TV, the watches, and how to code for it. They have a set of guidelines, and they have some standard elements which can be understood from this. Another aspect, yes, there are standard UI elements and symbols, and you can download all of these. What are the guidelines they follow to achieve whatever design style they do? All of this can be accessed. Their accessibility rules they follow. design for other accessories like watches, everything, all the information you need as a developer, design, develop, distribute, all of this is available here. Everything for watches, TVs, guidelines, screen resolution settings, all of them. I'm not going to get into details of what is available, just roughly going through. So this is what we actually spoke about so far. Interactions, visual design, icons, images, menus. So they have their own set of rules for designing for iOS. Let's look at Android. This is developer.android.com. This is designing for Android. And it's important even as developers we look at this just to speed up the process of developing the products, to understand how the elements of products work, everything we discussed like usability, style, patterns, and there are certain guidelines you need to follow for wearable products, Android TVs, phones, tablets. All of them is available here. So when you get into design, you can have a in-depth look at it. Material design for Android. This is where this is the website link I'd been talking about, the material.io. It's like a standard set of rules, and we've discussed it through our workshop now. Animations, transitions, interactions, everything. If developers would make a lot of their work easier if they understood how design works, and understanding designs and these rules are important for designers and developers just to enhance the whole experience and the whole process of developing a product, designing and developing a product. I will probably share all these links. So the next thing is about design tools. As a part of our pre-workshop, I had requested all of you to download Adobe XD and Zeppelin. If you haven't, please download now. We will be exploring XD and Zeppelin. These are the tools which I have been using or has been largely used for designing and prototyping. Designing is Figma, Sketch, and XD. Zeppelin is more like a handoff tool. So what you see here, InVision, Marble, Framer, and Principle, these are all prototyping tools where once you design a certain set of screens or you have a visual design ready, you can prototype it, plan your interactions, plan your transitions, and it's a very important aspect or important part of designing where you can convey your idea to your teammates or your clients or your higher ups in your company, and just for communication within your team and communication of ideas, all of that prototyping plays important role even for you when you're trying to understand what you're designing and how the user would interact with it. So you're simultaneously prototyping it, designing it, prototyping it. It's a continuous process, and it helps you visualize what your ideas are. What we will do is explore the XD and Zeppelin. I mainly use design and prototyping tool as XD. It has the flexibility for me to design and simultaneously prototype and understand the interactions or the transitions. So as a favorite, I use XD. But there are a lot of tools which I've explored like Figma and Sketch before XD. But I find XD to be the most handy tool. So to start off, because it's a very simple tool and the interface of the tool is absolutely super simple, I thought we could explore XD for a designing tool. And as a project handoff tool, once you've finished designing your screens and you want to push it to your development team, This is a tool which is used for handing off the project. Okay, where you can upload your screens and the developer can view it and understand different aspects like layout, position, placement, and how they can translate it into coding or developing the front end of it. So before we start designing, there is some simple set of rules or some key elements which we need to keep in mind. Try and keep the user interface as simple as possible. Let's not have too many elements, too many interactions, too many colors, too many icons, very distracting, and it causes some sense of frustration and irritation to the user. And let's try and keep it consistent so that if the user moves from one page to another page, there is always a sense of consistency, and they feel like they are a part of they're using the same product and they're all a part of the same product. And let it be, there should be some purpose to whatever you're designing, whether it's a page layout or whether it's an interaction or if it's an action button or why you want that action button. Have a purpose or a understanding of why it should be there, and use it with some thinking and strategy in your mind of how the layout should be, where the color should be, where I want to use texture, where I want to use lines, what colors do I want to use. Think about it. Do spend time in understanding what should your product be and how it should look. Use a typography to create a lot of clarity. The user should be able to read and understand it with absolute ease. Try to create hierarchy so that whatever you want the user to see, they do focus on that and the rest follows. And make sure your communication is happening on how you plan, and they all feel everything you design should be one product, or all the screens you design should fall or come under one product. You should not feel like there's an imbalance or it's not continuation. There's no continuity between each screen or the actions or anything. And do keep in mind about all the UI elements we spoke about and all the default interactions the users are already familiar with, like search, drop down, checkbox, radio buttons. These are all actions which the users are already familiar with. Let's not disturb them. Let's use it to our advantage and think of all these default available elements and default states, like what happens when you hover over a button should something happen. Default states like there's absolutely no action taken, what happens, what is the user seeing. The hover state, default state, clickable state. You need to think of all of these when you're designing a whole product. We may be running out of time today, so we're going to stop here and we will explore the product and design some screens in our next session. Before I end it, I just want to let you all know what is planned for the next session. Of course, we'll pick up from wherever we have stopped today. We will explore the products in the next session. Apart from that, I've also planned a couple of other things. We will understand the entire design process in depth. What are the requirements? What is information architecture? How should the user flow work? What are the different elements and how we can place it? We will try and paper prototype and wireframe some, and through our guided experience, guided exercise, and we'll experience the whole part of design process and how we go about it. And I have a small design hackathon plan. Depends on how I could pan this over 2 hours tomorrow. We'll see at prototyping and creating some design solutions. And then we can have an interactive session and we can discuss any of your doubts and we can present our work and we'll see how that goes. I hope to see you all in the next session. And I would like to conclude today's session. If you all have any further questions, please feel free to drop in or leave a message, and do feel free to ask any questions right now. Okay, thank you all for coming and attending the workshop today. I hope to see you learning, and I hope it's going to be more exciting tomorrow. We'll have some hands-on work and we'll explore all the tools and understand the design process.